about myself. I'm a software architect at ASML. ASML creates the machines that build your chips that are in your phones and in your laptops, but they also do a lot with Java. The repository I created is listed here. So the examples I will show are in this repository. Basically, I had some ideas of tools and libraries. Then I asked around on Twitter and got even more good tips. In the end, I had about 60 tips. I probably won't be able to demonstrate 60 tools in 45 minutes, so the rest you can look up in the GitHub repository. If you have any questions, please ask them later, or if you have a short one, you can interrupt me. But if you want to have a discussion, we can do it afterwards, or contact me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Oh, that was one too quick. That would have been nice, then you had a nice break now, but unfortunately. So, but first, let me ask you one question. What Java tool should you really use nowadays? Any idea? In general. Java 17, start migrating. Okay. Now we go to the real tools. So the first one is ArcUnit. So ArcUnit is basically a tool which allows you to check your architecture with JUnit. Probably all of you use JUnit or have used it at some point in time. And with ArcUnit, we can create nice rules to basically make sure that our code is structured nicely. We all know microservices. The hype seems to be more or less open, so we're going back to a bit more monoliths, but then hopefully a bit nicer structured. And that structure, we can verify it with rules like this. Like we see here, every class in the controller package with a REST controller annotation should end with, and then the screen is a bit short, should end with controller. So that's basically more a naming check. So we can see here that resides in and has an annotation, and then it has a name. We can verify that. I will run the test later. So we can also say classes in the payment package should only use classes in common or Java packages. We don't want payment packages classes to do something with bookings or other things. And classes in the common package shouldn't use classes outside of the package. We don't want to have common use packages from payment, because then you get cyclic dependencies, and that then basically is a nightmare hell. So we have all kinds of these rules. So classes in the controller package can only be used by classes in the controller package, and in the service package, that can only be used from the controller package. And this is all just JUnit. You see some asserts in it. We can run them. And we see that our code has a nice structure. I have a really simple example, so of course it works. But this way you can nicely work with different architectures. So that's the first one. The second one is awaitility. And so probably if you've ever written asynchronous code and you want to test it, it's always horrible. You could do something like this. We do a thread.sleep 2000, and then we see if the list is filled. You all written code like this probably someday in your career. You don't have to shame for that. With awaitility, we can do it a little bit nicer. We can use the library to say await at most 2 seconds until something is added to the list. So if we run this, yeah, I guess, I mean, you're all Java developers, so probably you know that one is quicker than the other. So this one took 2 seconds, not weird because we have a thread.sleep of 2 seconds, and this one took a bit more than 1 second. So it's a nice little library to test your asynchronous code. Then let's go to the next example. Who here is using Jacoko for unit testing? Probably most of you are familiar with it. Jacoko has also another interesting feature in it. Let's see. So what we can do with Jacoko, we can create an application. We package the application. You're probably familiar with that. And then we can attach a so-called Jacoko agent. So that is simply a library you download. I put it here in my example, but you can download it also from the internet. Copy-paste the command. Let's see, where's my terminal? Jacoko agent. Copy-paste this in. So basically what I now have is I have a running application. It's a really sophisticated application. It has a car endpoint, and that's basically it. So we call it, and we get a car back. Woohoo! The interesting thing is if we now basically stop this application, and we run the second command creates a report of this. So now I have a report, and I can find the report. Let's see, where is it? This one, I believe. And when we look at the report, let's pick the REST controller. We see that the constructor is called, of course, and also the getter is called, but yeah, there is no post being executed, of course, because I didn't do a post. So you can use this for monkey testing, like I just did. But in previous company, we also used this for like feature tests. We had tests in Cucumber, which covered quite a lot of our features. We ran it and measured the coverage, and then we found out we had some very large gaps. And that was actually that code, which we could remove afterwards. So it's a really interesting tool to measure all kinds of coverage, not only for your unit tests. Then we go to the next one. Micrometer is basically a tool which you can use, and basically to do all kinds of measurements. So for instance, to count or make a counter or measure a duration. Here we have a timed measurement, so this measures how long the execution of this method takes. So if we call this application, and this is also integrated in Spring Boot. So if you do stuff with Actuator, I think Actuator uses this underwater as well, but you can use and create your own measurements basically, and then visualize them. So let's see, this is also a really simple application. I think it was micrometer. I was even lazier, it's micro. So this method is being called, and now I can look at the actual measurements. I can, for instance, look at time. And here I can see things like max duration, total duration. I can see how many times stuff is being called and information like that. Probably you don't want to look at it like this. Oh, sorry, yes, I can make the screen a bit larger. So here you can see all kinds of information. Probably you don't want to look at it like this. You want to feed this information to some monitoring dashboard or something like that to create like nice graphs or statistics about it. But you can use micrometer basically to feed that monitoring tool. Then we go to the next example. That's PyTest. Who here already has used PyTest? Quite some hands, really nice. So what PyTest is doing, it runs a unit test, and then it changes the production code. So for instance, if you have if true in your production code, it will change it to if false and run the test again. If the test still succeeds, then it's a bad test, because the production code was changed and your test still succeeds. They call that mutants and stuff like that. But that way you can basically test how good your unit tests are. So if I give the example here, I can simply run it. Let's see, this one we no longer need. So basically, I now run it. I don't have to do a lot of special stuff. I simply declare the Maven dependency, and I say which classes I basically want to analyze. And then I get a nice report again. Let's show that one. So let's click true for now. So here we can see basically which branches are tested properly and which branches aren't tested properly. It's a really helpful tool. I mean, sometimes you forget to add coverage or you forgot a branch to test it. And of course, you can try to do that with your mind and figure out what you forgot. But this tool often is a lot easier to use, especially for unit tests. Sometimes for integration tests is a bit of a challenge, but for unit tests, I can really recommend this one. Then we go to test containers. Who here has run tests which use a database? Yeah, probably everyone almost, right? Oh, wait, I have to look at the test. So with test containers, I can use the dependency, and basically test containers is like an abstraction layer on top of Docker containers, to say it in short. You can use basically any Docker container, such as, for instance, a MySQL container, and then use that one to perform your tests. So here I specify which version of the Docker image I want to use. I created a really simple test, a table. It inserts some books and it retrieves some books. So really basic stuff. But the main idea is that you can use these containers to really easy test stuff without having to say, in the past, what we often did was like we had an Oracle database in production, and we ran the unit tests against an H2 database or something like that. But then you use Oracle database specific features, and your unit test breaks because H2 doesn't support them. With this solution, you can run the same thing locally without the effort of having to install things. You can use it on the build server, etc. And it works. You see it's green. So this is a nice abstraction to use containers effectively, Docker containers. Didn't want to close this one. And we go to the next one, Gatling. So again, I have a really simple endpoint. It's not about the endpoint. It's about this class, the simulation. Who here has used JMeter in the past? Yeah. Me as well. Then I tried out Gatling, and I was really happy. I even, when I gave presentations before and showed how easy you can create reports and tests with Gatling, I had some people literally crying because they were already struggling for a week to get JMeter results in a nice report. So yeah, I like Gatling. Nowadays, I wasn't aware of that. Before you had to use a Scala DSO. Nowadays, they also have a Java DSO. So you can create like scenarios. So here it's basically a loop of 5 times where I go to the endpoint /car. I check if it's a 200. I pause. I go to the car part. I do a pause again. And that script, I run that a couple of times. Basically, I run this for 800 users, and those 800 users are started during 10 seconds. So after 0 seconds, I have like 0 users, and after time, they ramp up. But of course, some also ramp down. If we run this, oh wait, I wanted to show a second thing with that. Let's see. So we're going to do 2 demos in one to save some time. So for Gatling, we have this one. So I started the Gatling test, and after that, I'm directly going to profile my application with the Java Mission Control and Java Flight Recorder, which is nowadays freely available, also on production use. Before you had to pay for it on production, but now it's completely free, no longer part of the JDK, but you can download it separately. So that's another tool that I can recommend. Let's see, it's here. Let's see where my application is. Now I have to be quickly because else it's finished. This one. So I can start a flight recording, configure all kinds of stuff, but I'm lazy, I simply press finish. Now it basically starts profiling my application. You can do that with really low overhead, like only a couple of percentages overhead above your application, so it's really efficient. And let's simply pause it for now to look at what's coming out. Of course, it's a demo, so something needs to go slow or doesn't work. It really doesn't want to work. Let's simply do it quickly again. Oh, okay, it's not started yet. It was a bit too quick. Simply wait a few seconds, and then we'll stop it and hope. Yeah, that works better. So it already does some high-level analysis, like file I/O, what's going on, but you can get really deep insights, like what kind of memory is being used, how many threads are you using, how are you using your heap, how many garbage collections are being performed. I guess none, because I really did a really simple example. But this can give you really detailed information on what's going on in your JVM. Also, what methods are being called, what methods are slow. So you can use this to optimize your application. You can also have a bit more basic information without doing the profiling stuff. That's also possible, and do heap dump analysis and things like that. So it's a really nice free tool to play around with. Oh, and then I forgot to show the nice part, the Gatling stuff. So the Gatling test, it passed by now. Let's see if we can... I don't know which one the last one is, so we'll simply hope for the best. So here with Gatling, you get a great report. I mean, for the people who worked with JMeter, this is your Excel, basically, but then automatically. So we see things like the number of requests. Oh, apparently I have not a good example, because here my requests failed. We can see how many people are active, so it ramps up to about 800, and then it goes down again. All kinds of information, and this is even the basic information, because we can also go to details. We can see things like the 99th percentile, which is often being used as a measurement for performance. We can see things like errors. This one apparently had quite a lot of errors. Number of requests, a lot of information basically, which you get for free. This report is created automatically for you. So I really like this one as a performance analysis tool. Then we go to the OWASP dependency check. We're coming now more in the security corner. So OWASP dependency check basically, let me type in between, basically checks if your dependencies have any known vulnerabilities. To do that, it downloads like huge files with vulnerabilities, and then it sees if you have any of those vulnerabilities in your dependencies. With conference Wi-Fi and stuff like that, I opted to cache those files locally. You can also cache them in your own company, and then it's a bit quicker, because then it doesn't have to download those files from the public internet. If you want to do that, it's also in the Git repository. So I think it's almost finished. Yeah, created a nice report. Yeah, nice report here. If you saw the Gatling report, that's also nicely visualized for management and non-techies. This one is a bit more like for developers, let's say that way. They forgot the nice look and feel. So we see here what the severity is and things like that for the dependencies that we have in our project. So really useful. You can also use this to, it's a Maven plugin, so you can say, if I find an issue with severity critical, I want to fail the build. And then it simply breaks the build and you don't continue. So you can use it in your pipelines to make sure you don't have any security stuff in your stuff that goes to production. Then I have another one which is security related, and that's Poi, who once created a regular expression to verify if a password matches requirements. Yeah, I see some hands. Who liked it? I see 1, 2 hands. Okay, not too bad. Everyone his own pleasures, I would say. For me, those things are often quite complicated, also if you want to change something. And I wasn't aware of Poi. This was one of the suggestions I got from Twitter. With Poi, you can basically define nice rules in readable format. Maybe some people can read regular expressions. Well, I can't. I can read this better. So here we simply specify a list of rules, like the length, how many digits we want, special characters. That we don't want white spaces, we don't want to have a sequence of characters. It should be character, digit, something like that. And that's basically a validator that we create, and then we can use that validator to validate any password which we create. So yeah, we can run this one. And then it has checked that my password here, this one and this one, and this one isn't valid. We do assert false. So that way we can easily work with our password management. Then we get to the next one. This is more about the general tooling support. Who has ever had problems writing a proper equals method? Yeah, your IDE sometimes help you for it. But with equals verifier, basically what we can do is equals verifier automatically test if we have written a proper equals method or not. So I wrote one here in student, and I wrote one in fixed student, which contains some improvements. read it later if you want to look at the details. It also has a hashcode method. So with equals verifier, we can see that the simple one, that doesn't work. It throws an exception, which starts with expected message error. Yeah, it found a problem, blah, blah, blah. Hashcode should be equal. So basically, you have to improve your hashcode method. And when we test the fixed student, it passes. So it's a nice way to make sure that whenever you change something to an equals or a hashcode method, that it's implemented in a correct way. Next example is about GraphQL. So basically what this does is, if you write like traditional REST endpoints, and you, for instance, say, I have a school which has a list of students, then you have a REST endpoint school, and when you call it, you get all the stuff back. That was like in the old days. Well, maybe you were only interested in the name of the school. Still, you got all the information back. You had to convert it to objects from JSON or whatever. So it was not really flexible, or you needed to create extra endpoints. With GraphQL, what you basically do is you can create like queries. So the request contains a query and simply says, I want to retrieve this information from you. So let's see for the first one. So for instance, here we say we want to query the account, and we want to retrieve the ID and the name. I use rest assured, that's simply a library, but that way I get this information back. Simply the account ID and the account name. Now when I make it a bit more advanced, I can do almost the same query, but now I say I also want to have the user, and I want to retrieve the first name and the last name of the user. Now if I do send that query to my endpoint, it will return that information as well. So yeah, I can also run it to show that it works. So now you can create like flexible queries. I have to say of course, it requires more work because you have to somehow define how that data is being retrieved. You can look up the details in my Git repository for that, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. So in some cases, this, I think, can be really helpful. Next example, Apache Poi. So yeah, sometimes you have to work with Word documents, Excel documents, and stuff like that. And there is a nice library called Apache Poi to do that. So what I here do is I create a document. First, it creates a document with some paragraphs, and it writes it. It's a docx document. And then in the next test, basically, I process it. Yeah, I know you shouldn't make tests that depend on each other, but this was the quickest way. I basically read the Word document, I do some parsing, I go through the number of paragraphs, I count the number of words, I believe it was, and then I put that in an Excel document, simply to say that you can read and write through these types of documents. And if we run that, I can already show it, it's from a previous example. And so I get some paragraphs in here. I can change fonts and stuff like that, basically do whatever you want. And in the Excel, I get like a summary. It's a bit small. It's a summary basically of the paragraph and how many words were in it. So really helpful if you ever want to do something with Excel or Word documents or any other Office documents. I believe it supports most of the formats because it's XML based. Let's see. Yeah, a somewhat similar library is iText, but iText then works on PDF files. Let's see. So we specify basically a directory. We say which type of font we want to have. We put some content in it. I think I copy-pasted this from Wikipedia. So really good content. I even put in the link to the Wikipedia page. And then I can say close, and then it's being created. If we run this one. Let's see, target. So yeah, you can see I'm not that good at designing, but the stuff is in here. So if you want to create something with PDFs, automatically generate PDFs, and then iText might be really helpful for you. Then I think the library which for me had maybe the nicest name of them all was JSoup. Oh no, sorry, Java Poet. Where is it? This one. So with Java Poet, you can actually generate your own Java classes. So this is what the expected output is. And with Java Poet, I can specify like the methods that are in the class, the constructor that we have, the fields and everything, and then we can simply generate that one. So if you ever want to generate classes, I think this is more helpful for libraries. Probably if you write code yourself, it's easier to simply write it yourself instead of generating it. But if you want to have meta-programming or something like that, or the meta-universe which we saw before, maybe you can use this to generate everything, and to generate the classes basically that you want to use. And then we come to the next one, which is Job Runner. So with Job Runner, we have different ways. Let's see, I think it also has a test here. Different ways basically to schedule jobs. It's a bit comparable if you use Spring Boot. You also have those scheduling options to schedule jobs. In case you don't have Spring Boot and want to have a separate library for it, you could use something like this. So here you can see, for instance, I schedule something which happens plus 2 seconds from now, or every 15 seconds, or based on an annotated job, which is, let's see, I think it's in here. Yeah, so this one, so the Adjob Annotation is also part of Job Runner. Here I say that this method, if it fails, I want to retry it once. And of course it fails because I throw an exception. Really simple example. And if I run this one, takes a little bit of time. So we see the enqueued job. That was the one that we had here. That's basically immediately executed or almost immediately. We have the scheduled one, the recurring one. So the recurring one should actually happen more often. But I think I have a timeout which is maybe too quick. Yeah, so the timeout is 30 seconds and it recurs every 15 seconds. So I was a little bit too quick. But you could also see, if you watched quickly, that the exception is being thrown twice. So you can see here that, yeah, of course it's a stupid example, but let's say you have a job which acts as a database, and maybe the database is down for a second, then you can retry it, and if the database is back up, then, yeah, basically your logic will succeed. So if you have something like queuing, I can recommend the Job Runner. Then the JSoup one, which I think is the second best name after Java Poet. The name probably is a bit confusing, but it helps you to parse HTML pages. At least I wouldn't get that from the name JSoup. So I simply created a simple example. I maintained some Chocolatey packages for Java installers, JDKs and JREs. And on that website, there is basically a counter which shows how many times those packages are downloaded. They are in some obscure div, which I can select. And then I can loop through some elements and basically retrieve the correct result and print that. So let's see. I haven't checked if my internet's still working. Yeah. So apparently, by now, I have almost 3 million downloads. So I could automate this with Apache Poi and print it in an Excel file and do that automatically every day, for instance, if I really wanted to know those statistics. Then another one which I never knew it, but I quite liked it. It's lib phone number, and it basically can give you all kinds of information about your phone number. For instance, validate it. Validate if it's a correct phone number, because of course, if you create a website, you don't want people to fill in wrong phone numbers because you want to spam them, and then you need to correct phone number. So if I enter a phone number, this is still, some people still have like a landline. You know those things from the past before you had smartphones. So this is an example of a landline number here in the Netherlands. And I use the utility basically to parse the number and also to see, I parse it for the Netherlands, and I check if it's a valid number, but I can also get some more information if I use the extra utility for the geocoder. And then I can say, okay, get description for a number, and then it actually says from which place in the Netherlands the number is. And I can also get the carrier, but in this case the carrier is unknown. I have another example, this one for like a smartphone number, and here we can see that the carrier is actually KPN and that the number is from the Netherlands. So this way we can try out all kinds of numbers, test if they are valid. So I also put in some invalid numbers. This one, for instance, is way too short. This one contains the +31. So else you again need to write a regular expression to check if it either starts with 0.6 or +31.6 and stuff like that. This basically handles it for you. Then I have another example which is about microstream. Microstream is like a way to store objects in a really simple way. You can specify the storage where it's being stored. I created a really simple example, so it's stored in memory, which you can store it in all kinds of databases. And with that, we can basically store Java objects as if it's Java code. So I don't need to create like ORM mappings or stuff like that. I simply say, okay, this is my Java code, store it. If I do it at plain, I still need some things like defining the root and stuff like that, and then store it. There's also the option to use it integrated with Spring Boot. And then with Spring Boot, use the repository magic from Spring. And then we can simply say, let's see, where is it? It's somewhere saves it. Sorry, it's here. So here I save the cars with simply the normal logic which you're familiar from if you've used Spring Boot with the Crust repository or the JPA repository or those things. So it's a really easy way to store stuff in a really object-oriented manner instead of converting it to relational or something else. Then we come to Opta Planner. Let's see. This one I need to run. There is some more code behind it, but let's focus at the front-end part first. Let's see. So here I created the schedule for JSpring. I mean, those guys do an amazing job, but I'm way better at planning the sessions, I know for sure. And I have some rules for that. I added some sessions. It's not completely correct because I needed to show some differences. Oh, okay, where is it now? So I defined some, they call it constraints. So for instance, a room can accommodate at most one session at the same time. Yeah, feels logical, I assume, else it gets a bit confusing if multiple people are speaking in the same room. Next to that, a speaker can only do one session at a time. I mean, it doesn't make sense to plan a speaker in 2 rooms at the same time. And then if I have a speaker who presents multiple sessions, the speaker prefers to have them one after the other. So after that, he can go home and get his well-deserved rest. So that's all. It's all written in Java code with some logic, which you can easily change. And I have another one that's a room prefers to host sessions of the same language. I know I'm getting gray and a bit older, but before when we had JFall and JSpring, we still had a lot of Dutch-speaking sessions. So it was a mix between Dutch sessions and English sessions. That also helped for new speakers who were more familiar with the Dutch language. Then it was easier for them to give a presentation. So for now, we assume that the Dutch-speaking speakers of this conference want to present their session in Dutch. So we see an example here. For instance, Sander Mak, he wants to present his session in Dutch. And actually, Sander is really popular, so he has 4 sessions today. He doesn't know it yet, don't tell him. else he get mad at me. But I mean, I needed an example with someone with multiple sessions. And now, of course, there is the difficult task as how do we schedule this across those time slots? And that's really challenging. And it's done now. You see, there are some quirks. I have too many sessions, so we still see 2 sessions here in the same time slot. But yeah, then I simply need to either disappoint some speakers or get an extra room. And you can see it here as well. So the score says -2 hard. It means I had a hard requirement of not having 2 sessions in the same room, but I broke it. Yeah, too bad for now. So you can use this for the planning things, but also for all kinds of algorithms like pod algorithms and stuff like that. It's really a nice tool to help you with things like that. Then I come to another example. So maybe some of you have heard of Apache Spark. It's nice for big data, but I found also another quite nice use case. I downloaded a 30 gigabyte data set of Amazon reviews, and I want to process them. What did I filter on? Let's see, where is it? Yeah, so I filter it on Java programming language, because I mean that's what we're interested in. And it's 30 gigabytes, a data set. And yeah, most of it is asserts, basically, because the only part where I read in stuff is basically here, and here is some magic, and that's it. And now I can run it. And now I can finally get a drink. So I tried it with Spark. This is relatively easy to set up. Then, I mean, yeah, I tried it with Java, with the input streams and the output streams and stuff like that. And yeah, got it working. And then, of course, got an out-of-memory exception because it's 29, 30 gigabytes. While in Spark, it works out of the box. So maybe it's a bit overkill to read a file with Spark, but it's really easy. And if you want to do some parsing with it, I parse everything on just my machine, which can also use multiple nodes. So if you have a complete data set or a data center, you can use multiple nodes and distribute the work, and then it goes even quicker. For now, it simply runs on my laptop. It has some challenges, I see. It's also, if you want to stress test your laptop, it's also a good idea. It's getting warmer by the minute. Let's see. So yeah, it's maximizing my disk and CPU very well. So if you want to do some performance tuning or something like that, it can also help. But I would have expected it to be sort of ready by now. So normally this is really quick, but I guess this is one of the demo cases where it fails. Normally it takes like something like a minute. Maybe I even... No, I didn't specify the duration in my test. So let's simply stop it for now because we have some more interesting tools. One of them is toggles. So nowadays with continuous delivery and stuff like that, a lot of people talk about feature flags, but I haven't seen much of that being implemented in reality. And someone recommended the toggles tool, and yeah, I have to say I quite like it. I never used it before. If I start using it, let's see, where was it? Okay, I have other stuff running. So basically, I can use some features. I specify them with labels. It's basically an enum. And some of them are enabled by default, and some aren't available yet. I have a really simple controller with some get mapping. So this one simply returns. This one checks if awesome is enabled. And this one checks if almost ready is enabled. So if I check on feature 1, so that works. Awesome works. What was the other one? More awesome. almost ready. Doesn't work. So now if we go back to the tool, because it was console. Actually, I have a nice console where you can see all the feature flags that are there in my application. And I can simply say, OK, enable this one. And now when I refresh my page, it's there as well. So if you want to do something with feature toggles, then yeah, this makes it really easy to even do it on the fly on your systems and change the values. Then I had two examples. Let's see, where are they? Docker images. So yeah, maybe you're familiar with Docker and you created Docker files and build the images yourself. There are also some excellent plugins for it. For instance, the Adjob Maven plugin, and there is the the build packs which we can use in Spring Boot. And that way we can create like optimized images who are basically more secure, smaller, etc. So they try to make it easier for you to create those images. So that's a nice way of working with it. And then we have, let's see, where is it? JReleaser. So with JReleaser, you can quite easily configure the releases you want to create, and you can configure, for instance, how you want to format the messages, the changelog, and stuff like that in an easy way. And then, for instance, create Chocolati packages or homebrew packages or any packages that you want. There's a lot of logic behind it. And I think I have an example of the, it's not directly here of the status, but it does a lot of automation for your release process, but the creator is here in front, so if you have any questions, approach him after the session. Then another one which I find really interesting. I hate it when we have all dependencies, but I also hate it to update them. And if I go to my GitHub repository, let's see, Java Hidden Gems. I have a workflow created which uses renovate. It's a little bit of configuration. You can check it out later. And it's basically an action which I can run. And then it checks if my dependencies are basically old. And for each old dependency, depending on how you configure the plugin, you get a new pull request. So here I get a pull request to update this version. I can simply say, OK, merge my pull request, and I'm up to date. So I can really recommend it to make sure you have up-to-date versions available. There are two others which I find quite nice, and one of them is the old group ID alerter. Basically, to give a concrete example, in the past we had the Java EE, the Java X namespace, which we used for the Java EE artifacts. Nowadays it's basically under Jakarta. So you can upgrade to the latest version of the old artifact, but then you're still on an old artifact. And with the old group ID alerter, which is available from Maven and Gradle, you basically get an alert whenever you should upgrade. Let's see. Then another interesting one I found was Open Rewrite. With Open Rewrite, basically we can define rules. It's a bit like search replace on steroids. So for instance, there are some predefined recipes for auto format and for converting stuff from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5. But we can create our own as well. And if we, I'm too lazy to create them, but if we run one of these, where's my terminal? It's gone. So it runs, it looks at my code, tries to make the changes for these recipes. I also saw recipes to, for instance, do an upgrade from Java 8 to 11. I haven't seen them from 11 to 17 yet, but that would also be possible. So it can help you basically to, in a structured way, upgrade your applications. You can see here that some changes have been made. I could also do a git diff. Okay, this is a change I made myself. That was a wrong one. You see my JUnit 4 has been removed because we want to use JUnit 5, which was already somewhere in my POM structure, so it wasn't added. We see that the imports have been fixed to use JUnit 5, the Jupyter ones, instead of the old ones. Public is removed, that's no longer necessary. So these kinds of things. I think somewhere it also did a formatting change. Yeah, here. So basically I had a crappy formatting here, and it automatically formats it in a nice way. So this is a nice tool to manage your application. Then I saw we had 5 minutes, so I can do 2 more. One of them is Maven Daemon. So if you ever worked with Maven and you think your build is slow, try the Maven Daemon. That can actually save you quite some time. It basically runs a daemon in the background and keeps it running, so that basically you can have faster build times. For the projects I measured, it definitely made some improvements. So install the daemon, and instead of using Maven, use the Maven D command. That helps a lot. And the last one I'm going to show is the Maven Enforcer plugin. Let's see. So with Maven Enforcer, we can enforce all kinds of things. For instance, the Maven version, the Java version. But the things I found most interesting is that you can basically make sure that the same dependency isn't defined with 2 different versions, or that you have transitive dependencies with different versions. For instance, let's say we use JPA with log4j 1.1, and we use some REST framework with log4j 1.2. Which one is being used? Basically, you don't want to have those things in production code. And with this Maven Enforcer plugin, you can basically enforce these rules and break the build if you want. If these things occur, you get a nice error message as well. Let's see if I can show that one quickly for you. Doesn't want to. Okay. You have to believe me for that. So that's basically the conclusion. Then, for me, I had one big question for all of you. Who knew all of the tools that I showed? Raise your hand. Unfortunately, because I was looking for someone to do the session next time, but no. So I hope some of these tools gave you some inspiration to maybe have a more deep dive at them later, or if you ever encounter an issue that you have, like, hey, I know this tool that exists for it, and this was like a subset. I think I achieved to do like 30 examples in 45 minutes. There are like 30 more in the GitHub repository. So if you like these ones, I can really recommend you to have a look at those. And with that, we can do this last slide. Thank you.